All right, who is ready to talk about the most exciting topic in talent acquisition today? Process. Now, I know process isn't sexy, but here's the deal though. In today's competitive market, a strong talent acquisition process is an absolute must. And regardless of the size or the scope of your business or your team, TA must always be approached strategically to really be able to attract that talent that we're all looking for, especially in today's crazy market. And the pressure to fill positions with the most qualified candidates, it's at an all-time high. We all feel that pressure. So from intake to onboarding, I want to share some insights with you all on how to build a structured process that is data-driven and repeatable. You'll hear me say those two terms a lot today. So what we really wanted to discuss is a couple of the steps through the process around intake and kickoff. We want to address the candidate experience, systems and data and how all that ties together, and then get towards the end around a proper documented debrief and also what a good retrospective and feedback loops look like. So hi, I'm Jeremy Schmidt. I am the Director of Global Talent Acquisition here at Codility. Codility is a cloud-based platform that organizations use to build a much more structured process around how you can assess a candidate's technical aptitude at the top of that funnel while removing a lot of the bias that we all know exists through that process, and just creating a much more engaging and collaborative candidate experience to give you a better chance to close that engineer at the end of the process, again, in arguably the most competitive global market that we've ever seen for engineering talent. And because of what we do, we have this deep conviction that we really have to set that gold standard of what a high performing TA team should look like and what that process should be. And so we recently took some time and looked ourselves in the mirror, and we revamped our entire process from soup to nuts. And I wanted to share with you sort of what we went through and then give you some actionable items that you could literally walk away with today to implement. So I think the first thing you need to do when you're looking at creating an effective process is how do you align that towards your goals and your values as an organization? So for us, our goals are on the bottom of the screen there. And then we really wanted to work towards driving and delivering differentiation and really focusing on decluttering systems and processes and making things more effective. Now, every organization is going to be different, but I think that first step in creating any type of effective process is you have to get that executive and senior level alignment and their commitment to hold themselves and their stakeholders accountable. And to be able to do that, you have to align to the company values and OKRs. So this is a great starting point if you're going to go through any type of process revamp. So when was the last time that you actually sat down and mapped out your entire TA process? This is actually our Miro board from when we did it a few months ago. And it looks heavy. I think everyone on this call should give themselves a pat on the back because there is so much that we do on the TA side of the fence behind the scenes that never is public knowledge to the business. But if you haven't done an exercise like this, it's really eye-opening. I would highly recommend it, because when we went through, everything in red here was something or an area that we identified that we could make immediate improvements on so that we could streamline our process, become much more efficient, and make it repeatable and data-driven as a team. So here are the steps that I'm going to touch on today. I don't think there's anything revolutionary as far as the process goes, but I do think we'll have some key takeaways and lessons learned that I can share with you and offer you of things that we went through and maybe some mistakes to avoid. So the first step for us is the intake process. And I truly believe that the intake process is one of the most crucial steps to kicking off a successful search and how you attract and identify top talent. But it's also maybe the most overlooked step in the process. And I think most organizations, when they think about intake, it's very inconsistent. It's rushed. It's not visible across the hiring team. And I think we're all guilty of getting those emails from our stakeholders that said, my role's been approved, my backfill's been approved, here's the job description, can we get it posted right away? And it just starts that fire drill where everything is constant, and it's just not process driven. So what we tried to do on our side is to create a successful intake process and make it much more standardized. Because the overall goal of the intake is to ensure, right, that both the recruiter and the hiring manager are as aligned as possible on the key elements of that hiring process and the ideal profile that you're looking for. Another thing we did that's been very successful is we level all open positions before we open them towards the same competencies that we're measuring our existing employees on. So if you're hiring an IC6 in engineering, here are the competencies that we pull in for our current employees. So why not measure those while we're going through the process? Let's make it data driven. Let's measure towards those same competencies. We also make the intake form that we've created visible to the entire interview team. So at any given time, someone that's being pulled into this interview process can see the ideal profile of what we're trying to put together. So taking this 30 to 45 minutes up front to have a formal intake, as heavy as it sounds, it can save you so much time on the back end. So you don't have to constantly recalibrate on the role and lose critical time in filling that position. And the next step for us is really building out that profile. We use Greenhouse as our ATS. And so we want to create scorecards that give us the ability to measure and document everything that we're trying to assess towards that ideal profile. And that's why as an organization too, we made the switch and we drove towards more of competency-based interview training. So competency-based interviews are just trying to find out or use open-ended question to understand how a candidate has used a specific set of skills in their previous role. How have they been successful? How do they approach problems, tasks, challenges? What is their thought process? And by moving more towards competency-based interviews rather than just looking at qualifications, this will make your team so much more agile in the way that they can interview cross-functionally. Because when everyone is measuring the same competencies the same way, then you can truly make the process repeatable and data-driven. And that's a big part of our success on our side of the fence. And another thing we do is we use a method called the CAR technique. And the CAR technique stands for content, action, and results. Tell me about a time you missed a release with a difficult customer and how you address that situation. And you're going to get two types of answers. You're going to get the one answer where they say, here was the situation, here's how we handled it, this is what we did, and here was the result. And then other people will say, well, you know, I think it's important to leverage your relationship and have strong communication with your clients and give that 25,000-foot view of the answer. But if you ask these type of questions towards measuring competencies, this gives you data points that you can go back and look at and track. So these are the type of questions that we want to document through our process to give us that real-time data to help us make better data-driven decisions. Another thing that we do on our side is we have training workshops with all of our hiring teams. And this is something I would highly suggest you do because this is something you can literally do and it doesn't cost you a thing. So talking about what competencies do you want to measure for your roles? By pulling in all of your stakeholders and interviewers, it gives everyone engaged, right? They have input into the process. They know what you're driving towards. And you can talk about what are the competencies that we want to measure for an IC versus a manager versus senior leader. You know, what competencies require their own step in our process for us to measure? What are some other indirect competencies that we can measure just during the process in standard interview questions? And again, the great thing about these types of interviews is it's repeatable and data-driven. And then once you actually identify what you're trying to measure, we document all of that into individual interview kits so that each person that plays a role in this process knows exactly what they're trying to assess for. And we even take it a step further and provide them sample questions. We define core competencies. We give them examples of what good looks like, what bad looks like, so that they feel prepared when they go into the interview. And be honest, How many people on this call right now know for a fact that they have interviewers at their organization that don't have the slightest idea what they're doing? Right? We all know that it's true. We all know that we have interviewers that are not good at it and aren't prepared to go into those interviews. And that's why it's so important that you conduct internal training with your interviewers, but also provide everyone with process materials to give them the best chance to be successful. So we actually add a link into all of our interview kits around these process materials to help them, to give them the training that they need. So we've built out forms around how to provide effective feedback, our recruitment process overview, definitions of the different roles, sample questions, examples of what great feedback and scorecards look like. On the flip side, examples of what poor feedback looks like so they know what not to submit. But I think a small step in the process like this that nobody might see, right, that's done behind the scenes is really, really, really critical to leading a successful interview process. But Jeremy, what's the difference between an intake call and a kickoff call? Well, I'm glad that you asked. So for us, a kickoff call happens after a role is open. We're starting to get candidates in the top of the funnel through the first couple stages, and that's when we schedule a successful kickoff call. So a kickoff call to us is basically to pull in all the stakeholders, everybody that's going to be involved in this process, to define the different stages, divide and conquer, who's going to measure what, who's playing what role through this process. We set timeline expectations. We talk about expectations around when they'll provide their feedback so we can make sure the process is efficient and moving forward. But it also gives everyone an opportunity to talk about, hey, what does great look like in this role? You know, let's everyone bring their ideas to the table, get that buy-in. Because at the end of a successful kickoff call, there should be zero ambiguity around who is playing what part in this process. Everything should be clearly mapped out. Everything should be translated and built into the systems and into those interview kits so that you are ready to go move forward an efficient process and make things go a little bit quicker. And this can be accomplished asynchronously. This doesn't have to be a live call for every one of your roles. You can do this through Slack or Teams or however you want to create a channel. The only thing is it has to be structured. You have to do it the same way, again, to make it repeatable. And it'll take you a little bit of time to find your cadence asynchronously, but if you conduct the kickoff the same way every time, your managers will get the point, right? They'll get on board with what you're trying to accomplish. So after you've built out everything in the systems, you've had your intake and your kickoff call, you're interviewing candidates, now it's time to really pull people through the process. So the one thing we had to do on our side was really consolidate all of our different phases so that everything could align for true pipeline optimization and metrics. So what we did, this is an example of how we stage things for our engineering side. So we have concrete stages that are mapped correctly in our ATS and then to our data visualization tool, which is GEM. And we have this 3 to 4 stage approach that we use for all of our hiring. Everything is mapped, everything is based on competencies, and this way we can pull from any of our engineering teams to hire any level role that we're trying to fill. We don't just have to wait for one team or one person to conduct an interview. We can pull from a pool of interviewers. And that's the great thing about defining those competencies and having an agreement on how you're going to measure those. Because if you're measuring technical acumen and adaptability and communications, and everybody is measuring those the same way, you can pull anyone in to do that interview and understand the feedback is going to be consistent across the board. And once you have this consolidated or staged approach, then you can generate those real pipeline optimizations. And for us, we do that through GEM. So GEM is a CRM that integrates directly with Greenhouse and other ATSs. For us, we only use it on the analytics side. And it really helps us, like I said, with our pipeline and analytics and optimization. So once you have everything synced, you can have real pass-through rates, time in stage, diversity through stage, literally analytics at the tip of your fingers. We can run simple reports by department, by recruiter, by hiring manager to see that live funnel. So as an example, I can clearly read this data chart and know what this data is telling me. 9 candidates at the top, 3 through the recruiter, 3 through the manager, 1 looks like offer declined. So this is telling me we need a heck of a lot more pipeline at the top of the funnel through those first couple stages for us to be able to spit out a hire. But having this data, being able to use this data with your hiring managers is so important to running an effective process. Because once you have the data, now the next step is driving towards automation and the proactive delivery of the data. Because hiring managers want to know where their recs stand, right? So one of our values is we think big. So what we did is we introduced automation reporting from GEM and integrated it directly into Slack channels. So we have weekly pipeline analytics delivered every Friday morning to each of our hiring managers, so they know exactly where their rec stands. And this is a great way to work asynchronously, build that communication with your managers, also documenting everything that's going through the process and giving those live updates weekly on their recs. And it's easy. Once the integration is complete, you can automate any type of report that you want to go out through GEM and roll it into whatever type of Slack channels or team messages that you've created, for that type of search. So now we have data in a good spot. We're going through the process. We're getting candidates towards the end of the funnel. What is the next step? And that's the debrief. So what is the purpose of a debrief? And I'm actually going to read this one. The purpose of a debrief is to share and discuss interview evidence and data. Each interview has a different purpose and goals, and it collects data about the different aspects of the candidate. When the data is combined, it creates a more full view of the candidate. It is crucial to collect feedback and have an honest discussion about the candidates and if you feel they can be successful in the role by using the data that you've gathered through the process to help you make the decision. But a documented and proper debrief, it isn't just about making a hiring decision. It's really about documenting those notes on all of the candidates that you've gotten to that step in the process, because at some point you're going to make a bad hire, right? We all do it. And having more data points, now you can actually go back and look at what did we miss in the process? What were we talking about in the debrief stage? Did we have concerns that came to fruition 6 to 12 months later, but we made the decision to hire that candidate anyway? Because at the end of the day, bad hires will happen, but we are all doing ourselves a disservice if we can't go back and learn anything of what went wrong in the process. And that's why a proper debrief, a structured debrief, is so important to end every search. So with that in mind, we document all of our debriefs, whether they happen live or asynchronously, and then we store those and date those so that at any given time we can go back and easily see everybody's thoughts, everybody's scorecards, and what was discussed when we made that decision towards the end of that process. Now we finally gotten to the offer stage. Every organization is going to be a different size. Every organization is going to have a different process here. For us, we really wanted to work smarter, not harder. And as a global organization, we have entities in many different countries. So all of the documentation is different. The offer letters are different. The NDAs can be different. So what we did is we built everything into Greenhouse, which again is our ATS, using token automation so that all of our templates are automated. And so once we go through the approval process, we're able to generate that offer letter for that individual region or country with the click of a button. It's also integrated directly into DocuSign, where we've built in sample templates. We can pull in the different benefits links. So for us, again, it was about driving differentiation, working smarter, not harder, and making all of our lives a little bit easier. So I would recommend on your offer stage, try to automate as much as you're possible. It eliminates a lot of the recruiter mistakes, which we know will happen. We're all really good at talking and selling and closing the role. We're all really bad at the back office part. It's just the nature of the beast. So the next part for us is that reference check, background, and that awkward gap between offer accepted and onboarding. So I'll start with the reference check part. And I think a standard reference check, while it's still valuable, the way it's done is a bit outdated. It's rare that someone is going to give you a poor reference that's going to say they're not going to be a good fit, for the position. So what we truly try to focus on with our references is getting good data on how we can position that individual to be successful. So talking to the references about ways where we can uncover, hey, what can we do to make sure that this person feels 100% safe in the role? What are areas of growth that they're excited about that we could focus on to drive that retention? How does everyone like to be recognized? That's a great question because everybody is so different these days. And being able to gather this data and provide it to the hiring manager before that person starts gives them an upper hand in how they're going to conduct their onboarding. How are they going to position that person to be successful? And at Codility, we took it a step farther. So our hiring managers are assigned at least one of the references that they have to conduct themselves. And we have SLAs around when they have to get that done and completed. And you may get some pushback here. Hiring managers are busy, we get it, but they should want to be engaged in understanding the best way that they can position their new hire for success, right? It's important that you get them invested in the start, and we can give them templates. We can give them all the information they need to go and ask the right questions to gather that information. But even talking about this during the intake, it sets that right expectation. So at the end of the process, Mr. and Mrs. Hiring Manager, once we get to the reference stage, we're going to make sure that we get you their last manager to speak with for 15, 20 minutes over the phone. Here's the questions that we're going to want you to ask. Are you comfortable with that? Get that agreement, get that buy-in. Everybody's background checks and I think onboarding process are going to be different. I think the one thing here we can agree upon is the more communication, the more over communication that you can do with the candidates from the time they sign that offer letter to the time that they start, the more you can document and sort of get them buying into the culture and excited about the role, the better. And again, every organization is going to be a little bit different there. So I leave that one to you guys. One of our core values here is we're real. And I think in one of my previous slides, you may have seen a quote that said, how do you know if you're winning if you're not keeping score? And that's why we created a search satisfaction score. And we have both our hiring manager and a recruiter actually rate themselves and each other on how they did during that search. And we weight the scores and we sort of set a benchmark of where we stand. But we also have our goal of where we want to get to from a satisfaction perspective. And I know this can be vulnerable. I know this can be awkward. I know that people have reservations with this. But on our side, another one of our core values is we take ownership. So we need to be able to admit where we did great work, maybe where we needed to offer some additional assistance. But we have to be able to create that strong feedback loop of both sides. And whether that's the good, the bad, or the ugly, it is so important for us to understand where we stand, where we can make improvements, and where we have to get better. And it's also a great way, if you're a TA leader, to assess your different hiring managers in different departments. It's also a great way for you to look at your recruiter satisfaction and how your hiring managers are weighting your recruiters. So that gives you opportunities to provide growth and training and make sure that everybody is aligned. So this is something that we implemented that I highly recommend that you do as well. So I wanted to make sure to leave a couple minutes for questions here, but just as a quick recap, as you're going through, really sit down, map out your process, look at each individual step, and I guarantee you will find a lot of areas where you can make fast wins and quick improvements. The more you can standardize, the more you can be process driven, make that repeatable for the 96th time, the better you're going to be, the more you can drive down your time to hire, the higher level of candidates that you'll be able to pull through your process. I think looking at measuring competencies versus qualifications is a huge uplift and will really help you create that as part of your process. Understanding your different systems, how they align, how you can automate those things to provide better data to all of your stakeholders through the process. Over communicating is always a good thing. And then really looking at a couple of those crucial steps in the process around the intake, and the debrief and that kickoff to formalize those steps, getting everybody's buy-in, understanding how you're going to go through the process makes things run much, much, much smoother. So just creating that culture of how you're going to track the data, what you're going to measure, and then at the end, pulling in those different feedback loops. At this point, I wanted to open it up, see if we had any questions, and would be happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn or answer anything offline as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jeremy. That was very insightful, considering the talent acquisition processes, but I will be interested in discovering, first of all, your challenges in this optimization process, and also the potential challenges that you might foresee for other organizations. And one additional question, what will be your learnings and suggestions to cope with these kind of challenges you might expect?
I think the biggest challenge from the start is getting that executive buy-in. It's easy to change process, it's easy to roll things out, but if your key stakeholders aren't hearing it from the top that this is a priority through the organization, people aren't going to adapt quickly and take this on. So I think as you're looking at your process and you figure out exactly what you want to revamp and why, presenting that to your senior stakeholders, getting their executive buy-in, having them manage that down and communicate it to the organization. So as an example, when we were going through our process the last few months and working on this, we discussed it at our all hands. Our chief people officer and our CEO said, hey, this is a top priority for us to make sure that we're delivering a world-class candidate experience so that we can hire the best talent possible. I think some of the pushback that we received or that you'll see is a lot of what we described, those additional steps can be heavy. And in a hiring manager's head, I don't want to have a 45-minute intake call. I don't have time to do a debrief call when we get candidates to the end of the funnel. So I think a lot of it is communicating why these steps are important. Again, managing that down from the executive level, but then holding yourselves accountable. So we have certain steps into place where we don't submit an offer for approval unless a proper debrief has been scheduled. And once your hiring managers know that, hey, this is the process, here's why we're doing it, and you get their alignment and buy-in, then things start to operate much, much smoother. But there's going to be a period of time of maybe a quarter, let's say, that you're working through a lot of those kinks in your process. But I think that the key to it is over communicating, providing the right type of training, and showing why doing these things is going to be valuable to the entire business.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm just checking the Q&A box, and I guess we do not have any more questions, but as you already mentioned, people can reach out to you via LinkedIn, also on our event platform. That was a great presentation, Jeremy. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.